This video is brought to you by Squarespace. 4 months ago I got myself the Sony a7CII. I took over 10,000 photos in this time frame and it totally replaced my a7 IV as my main camera for my photography and video needs. In this video I want to talk about my experience using the a7CII for a long period of time, how it compares to the a7 IV and why I prefer using it over its bigger brother. I will talk from the angle of an a7CII and a7 IV owner, trying to help you if you have an a7 IV and thinking of making a switch to the a7CII, or if you're someone looking to get a Sony camera but can't choose between the a7CII and the a7 IV. I purchased both cameras with my own money and I'm not attached to Sony by any means, but I would probably sound very positive about the camera because it is really good, as simple as that. If I show my a7CII in action and you see the menus in Japanese, it is not to brag about my ability to read Japanese, but simply because I bought it here and Sony cameras in Japan only come with Japanese menus. With the exchange rate at the moment it is quite a lot cheaper to get it here, but beware if you're just traveling in Japan thinking of getting a Sony camera without speaking Japanese. Okay, so with this introduction now out of the way, let's move on to the review. After I posted my first video using the a7CII, someone commented about a difference there is on the shutter mechanism between the a7CII and the a7 IV. The a7CII has something called an EFCS, electronic first curtain shutter, and the comment was saying that the bokeh with the a7CII will be affected when shooting at higher shutter speed. I won't elaborate on this EFCS thing here because my whole point is that you should ignore it, but still I wanted to give you a little bit of background. When reading this comment it made me question if I made a good decision getting the a7CII. If someone told me about that before buying it, it would have confused me and maybe dissuaded me from getting it. But I can tell you after a few months with the camera and thousands of shots taken with it, I have still not fully understood the concept of EFCS, and more importantly, I really don't care. I couldn't see a difference compared to my a7 IV and never ever I had thought looking at one of my pictures, this looks okay, but definitely without the EFCS issue it would have looked much nicer. And I guess you also never saw that when seeing my picture, so if they didn't look good it's because of other fundamentals that were lacking, like a good composition, an interesting subject, light or color combination. Same with the maximum shutter speed, which is only 4 thousandths of a second on the a7CII. On the a7 IV it is 8 thousandths of a second, and I did know about this one before getting the a7CII, but considering my work and how I shoot, I have no issues. I really almost never shoot with super fast lenses wide open in the middle of the day. When shooting around f4 in bright daylight, 4 thousandths of a second is already plenty enough, and if one day I really want to get some f1.4 creamy bokeh portraits in the middle of the day, I can always pop on an ND filter and problem solved. Given that this scenario is very rare, not to say that it never happens, having a slower maximum shutter speed was a non-issue for me. When reading the specs of a camera we always think that we need better, faster, sharper, while actually not really knowing the impact of such spec difference on our actual shooting practice. There is only a very few people who can really tell that 4 thousandths of a second is not enough, or the EFCS thing is a problem for them. They know what they are talking about and what they need, but if you just read it on the spec sheet or on a forum somewhere that it might be a problem, but don't even know how it would translate on your photos, just ignore it. There is a healthy amount of reading the spec sheet that you can do. It's important to know about the weight of a camera, the sensor size, the battery life, the lens lineup, really the big pillars of a camera system, but you should not obsess on such little, very trivial details because, as I said, if you're a working professional and know about this stuff, you know that it's not a camera for you, but for everyone else, me included, the street, the travel, the landscape, the vacation photographers, it's not relevant. And before talking about what makes me grab the a7CII over the a7 IV, let me take a minute to talk about today's video sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an easy-to-use all-in-one website platform that makes it simple to create a beautiful website, connect with your audience, and sell anything from physical to digital goods all in one place. At the start of the year, I decided to move my website and consolidate everything on Squarespace. It's a decision I'm very happy with today, mainly because it is so easy to manage. I now have a beautiful store, a clean portfolio, and an organized blog all on my personal website. The hardest part of moving to Squarespace was making the decision to do it, because despite having no coding or web design knowledge, building my website from scratch was incredibly easy, smooth, and even enjoyable. Starting from a blank canvas can be tricky, but with Squarespace high-quality templates, you can begin designing your website on a solid foundation, customize it as you like, and have it ready to launch in just a few hours. My online business is a crucial part of my activity, so having a platform that runs smoothly, delivers my digital products efficiently and offers a variety of payment solutions is essential. Squarespace is the perfect solution for both growing and established online businesses, and my experience with it has been a breeze. I highly recommend trying it out for yourself. Head to squarespace.com for a 14 days free trial, and when you're ready to launch your website, go to squarespace.com/Adrian to save 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain. So thanks a lot Squarespace for your support, I really appreciate it, and now let's get back to the video. So I prefer shooting with my a7CII now, it's a fact, and I think I won't be looking back. So what makes me pick up the a7CII over the a7 IV? Let's not keep the suspense for a lot longer. It is because of the size and most importantly, the weight. There is a slightly improved autofocus system with the AI processor. For the video shooters, you can put some LUTs on the a7CII to have a better preview of your footage, but for me, it's all about the weight. There is roughly 140 grams difference between the two. It doesn't seem like a lot, but I can tell you it is. When I first picked up the a7CII, my initial reaction was something like, wow, it's so small and so light. But as usual with new things, you get used to it very quickly. But I still have the a7 IV that I will keep as my studio camera and backup camera if anything wrong happens to the a7CII. And every time I grab the a7 IV, it reminds me of the size and weight difference. It feels a lot larger and heavier, so every time I'm reminded of how good it is to have such a light camera like the a7CII. If you're watching my channel regularly, you know that I love compact lenses. I'm totally happy with smaller ones that open only to f2.8 or f2. I don't like the added weight and bulkiness of f1.4 lenses. I don't shoot with big telephoto lenses either, so the a7CII is really the perfect camera for how I shoot. My biggest lens is the Sigma 28-70, which is really the limit of what I can tolerate, especially on such a small camera body. Past that you get very front heavy setups that are really not comfortable. For bigger lenses I assume that the a7 IV is a better pick, but I think anyway that if you're shooting often with a big 70-200 or even larger lenses, it is really not the 140 gram gap that will make the difference. If you're like me, more a street travel photographer who likes lighter setup to feel more prone to have your camera with you more often than not, the a7CII is the best option. So weight is the main reason I prefer the a7CII over the a7 IV, but let's keep on talking about what I like about the a7CII. And this one could sound a bit weird, but the a7CII is a bit more plasticky and feels ever so slightly cheaper than the a7 IV, but I like it. The materials still feel very nice and seem to be very durable. The buttons are a bit more clicky. I switch between stills and video mode a lot, and it's just easier to accurately switch between the modes without looking at the camera. With the a7 IV, I often found myself with the dial stuck between two modes or too far in the S&Q mode, and also the shutter button. I prefer it on the a7CII. On the a7 IV, the resistance of the shutter is a bit smoother and probably a little bit more premium, but the limit between shooting and not shooting feels a little bit blurred. On the a7CII there's like a little notch, a little step at the end of the course that clearly makes you understand that you just shot a photo. And this is typically helpful when you're shooting from the hip or trying to shoot with your arms extended, not being able to see the screen. Just a quick detour to talk about why I don't use the Fuji X-E4 anymore. I got the a7CII to see if it could be the perfect camera that feels as light as my X-E4 while being a better hybrid package. I also did not really like juggling between systems and was hoping to consolidate fully with Sony. The a7CII when paired to a compact lens is still slightly heavier than the X-E4, but having a good and deep grip makes it feel almost lighter. I feel like I'm also more prone to keep the camera in my hand rather than hanging around my neck, which maybe makes me take a little bit more photos and make me quicker to react. The a7CII turned out to be everything I like about the Sony system in a package that feels easier to carry around than the X-E4, so I sold it. Being able to share lenses between my two Sony bodies, having better autofocus and video specs really made sense, so that's why I got rid of the Fuji and got deeper into the Sony ecosystem. Even though I love my a7CII, there's also things that I like less about it, and the Viewfinder is one of them. Replying also to a lot of similar comments I received asking if I'm not bothered by the Viewfinder placement, the size of it, or the resolution. It is indeed not the best viewfinder on the market, technically speaking. The resolution is not up to the higher industry standards, and the magnification, or how big the image feels when looking in the viewfinder, is also not that good, but those really did not bother me all that much. What is really not good about this viewfinder is the colors. There is a pretty serious tint shift towards green comparing to the LCD screen and the final image. You can adjust the tint of the AVF in the settings, but it doesn't correct it all. As for the placement, I actually prefer this rangefinder style AVF placement. I have glasses and a pretty long nose, so having it on the side prevents me from putting too much of my nose oil all over the LCD screen. I also like to have it on the side so I can sometimes leave my left eye open to better see my surroundings and potentially anticipate a good moment to catch. So I don't mind the low resolution, but I don't like the colors of this EVF, and I actually like its placement over the a7 IV. I use it a lot because when shooting in the middle of the day, relying on the screen only is very hard, and when I do so, I judge things like composition and exposure, but I don't do white balance adjustments or anything color related based on what I see in the EVF, because I know that the colors are not good and not accurate. Having no joystick is not ideal, but in a previous video where I talked about my custom buttons and settings for the a7CII, I also showed my workaround. I use the center wheel to move my focus zone left and right. I also have the AF on button giving me the option to focus and track something in the center, making it easier to focus and recompose. Ultimately, there's also the touchscreen that I happen to use more than on the Sony a7 IV, but overall I think there's enough options to compensate for the lack of joystick, but obviously it is always nice to have. There are also less custom buttons on the a7CII compared to the a7 IV. The body is smaller, so there is less space to place as many buttons, but with the FN button and a thorough analysis of what you need most of the time when shooting, I think there is just enough buttons to quickly access your most used settings. The Sony system is also very flexible, letting you assign almost any setting to any button, so that was also a non-issue for me, but we are always happy with more and extra custom buttons. So I think that this camera, given its price point, can be a good pick for such a wide range of photographers. It has the features, the sensor size, the video specs that professionals love and need, but when you compare to some of the competitors where it is hard to get their camera at a reasonable price, even second-hand, I think that the a7CII is also a good fit for the less experienced photographers. Starting with or getting a full-frame camera very early in your journey might look a little bit overkill, but it is something that I did personally and it worked. You have less excuses if you find yourself unhappy with your photos, and by the way, I know that you can get awesome pictures with small and big sensors. The a7CII is really a camera that gives you a full frame experience in a small and light body, so it's hard to justify going for an APS-C camera only because of the form factor difference. The a7CII is the camera that I could consider my workhorse, that I'm also having a lot of fun with. It combines the working ability, the reliability, with the compactness that makes it fun to use. So I hope that my insights about the a7CII and a7 IV are helping you to make a decision. Thanks a lot for watching as always, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.